Hello everyone, welcome back to the Book Brood. We're gonna try this again.
This video is mostly going to be about our best and worst reads of 2019.
Yes.
We realize it's been a different year for us, not too much video posting, very different reading tastes, at least for me.
Yeah. I had a huge dry spell or whatever of reading where I didn't read for like 2 months. And I have read very little in the second half of 2019. But that being said, we still do have our lists of best and worst reads of the year, and we wanted to bring those to you.
Yeah, I had a very different year because I finished my sci-fi list very early in the year, and so then purposely changed the kind of theme of story and type of author that I was choosing to read. Without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it.
Should we start with our best or our worst?
First.
Okay,
First.
Let's do it.
So I read my first romance ever in 2019, and that just kind of tipped me over a precipice, and I just fell into this total smut pit and have yet to escape. But anyway, Truce by R.L. Matthewson, which is part of her Neighbor from Hell series, which overall is amazing. I feel like I really enjoyed reading that. But this one, I think it was like number 3 or something. I didn't really like too much because it was just, both characters were just very like abusive to each other.
Oh,
and doing like straight up illegal things like kidnapping one another and stuff. And so it was just very, very off-putting and not romantic at all. So yeah, that was one of my worst for the year. No particular order for me on mine.
Oh, I ordered mine going from least worst to most worst. Is that how you would say that?
Yes, that's a way you can say it.
Okay. Coming in at number 3 for my worst is If We Were Villains by M.L. Rio. And I read this for a book club read at the beginning, or towards the beginning of the year. And this is a book that's recommended for people who like The Secret History by Donna Tartt. And I can see why. They're very similar storylines, but The Secret History is one of my favorite books, and I've read it so many times, and If We Were Villains did not compare at all.
Is that the one you suggested for book club?
Probably.
And you ended up not liking it?
I did not like it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's too bad.
Amy and I call the main character a turnip.
Oh, that's where the turnip came from.
The turnip.
Yes. All right. Well, my next one was The Stars Change, and that's by Marianne Mohanaj, I think is how you pronounce it. I read this one for the Owls Challenge because it had the word star in the name. That was the only reason I picked this, and because it was an audiobook on Scribd, maybe. I don't know. Maybe it was Audible, but it was trying to do this kind of like sci-fi-ish story. I'll give it an A for effort, but it had this weird perspective shift thing that it did where it go by one character, and then a character that one interacted with, it then switched to their perspective, and then introduced a new character, then switched to their perspective. And I guess it was an interesting attempt on how to take on a story and structure it. But it just wasn't a very satisfying story, and it ended up that you didn't really connect with any of the characters too much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. The silver medal of worst, I guess, is another book club pick, and that was Big Little Lies by Liane Moriarty. And I don't understand. This is such a popular book, but I absolutely hated it so badly. It was way too long, and it was dumb, and I just hated it so much. So much.
Yeah, that one, you tried to watch the show too and hated it also.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I don't get the appeal. Don't understand it at all. Not for me.
Yeah. That's how it goes sometimes. All right, the last one on my worst list was Cursed by T.L. Brown. I read this one because I read Blackwater by her, and I apparently enjoyed it, but I found out it was like the 7th book in a series, though it like started kind of its own spin-off story from there, and so I was like, oh, well, I'll go back and read all of them. I will preface with this, though, that the foreword was written by her, and apparently it was the first book she had ever written, and apparently had done a bit of rewrite for it for the audiobook, which I did. It was so bad. I bet you dollars to donuts that it started as a Twilight fanfiction.
Oh, yeah.
Because it just had that whole like format of the girl, vampire, possible love interest, but then human, possible love interest, and it's just constantly like she would decide which one she wanted to be with by which one she was interacting with in that moment. So it was like every time that she interacted with one, oh no, I totally want this one. Then oh no, I totally want that. And then I can't even remember. I can't even remember what happened or why I finished it. It just wasn't good. But like I said, it was her debut novel. So yeah.
That is a good point. You don't know. You said you don't know why you finished it. That's a good point. I DNF books all the time, constantly. If I'm not liking a book, I will not finish it. So that's probably why I had such a hard time making this list of worst.
Oh.
Because there weren't that many that I actually forced myself to read. What I have right here is 2 book club picks, which I had to finish for book club. Mm-hmm. And then gold medal, the worst book I read all year, was such a short book, and I needed it for my Owls challenge. And that was Fox 8 by George Saunders. I don't understand. This is a story about a fox learning English and learning how to be a human. And so like the spelling and the grammar is just absolutely terrible, and it just drove me so crazy. I couldn't even get into the story, and I don't like stories told from an animal's perspective, so like this book had nothing for me. Mm-hmm. No.
It had the animal on the cover, though, which was what you needed.
That's what I needed for my owls, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, the things we put ourselves through for reading challenges, right?
I would have never picked it up or finished it if not for the owls, so there's that.
Well, ready to go on to best?
Absolutely. I have 9 for best.
I have 10, so I guess I will start
Perfect.
out. The no particular order again, but first book I read this year made it to my best of list, and that's Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro. This book was a challenge book from Heidi that she gave me a pick of 3 and did try a chapter on each of them and went with this one. Very good. Just a very heart-wrenching story. Hard to give any kind of background on it about what it's about.
Best
without
to go into it blind.
Giving it away. Yeah, best to go into it blind, but very deep and heavy character story. How we connect with people and where we fit in life. But deeply affected me way more than it affected her. And ended up watching the movie too, and I cried all throughout it, and she just like rolled her eyes all throughout it at me.
It was a good movie.
It
was a good movie, but you saw the weirdest things. Maybe I'm just heartless.
It's called empathy.
Maybe it is, because you cried all the way through Room, and I might have teared up once or twice, but
I'm just easy to tear up, I suppose.
I don't know. But then I can sob over the dumbest thing, so it's whatever. Okay, so I have 2 that are tied for first place. This is a ridiculous scoring system I have right here. So at number 8 for me is Free Will by Sam Harris, and I really enjoyed this little book. I need to go back and reread it. It's very short, and it just discusses how the brain works and how we have this illusion of free will, but really we don't have choice, and we're making the only decisions that we possibly can in the moment, in every moment. And it was really comforting for me because it helped me to not hold certain people's actions like as it didn't feel like they were purposely doing things to, you know, be mean or a jerk or whatever. It's like they're making the only decision that they can, or like they're, you know, there's no decision. They're doing what they have to do, and I don't know. Anyways,
doing what their brain tells them.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't know. It was nice. I really enjoyed that.
Cool. So nonfiction making it on there.
Yeah.
I guess I've got a nonfiction on mine too. But, all right. So the next one I had was Solaris by Stanislav. This one is a classic. It was one of the last ones I had on my sci-fi list, but definitely I'm glad I saved it for the end. Yeah, very, very character-driven story, but about a scientist that goes to this planet that's kind of this anomaly, or goes to a station that's hovering above this planet that's an anomaly, but and it has an effect on everyone that visits that this planet, or the ocean of this planet is sentient in a way, and it creates visitors, which are people that have died in the people's past come back to life to, you know, for whatever reason, but they realize that it's not the actual person, not even their true personality. They realize that it's actually truly their perception of what the person was. So just a very interesting kind of, what would I say, introspective look on how we perceive people and what our relationship truly is to the people that we connect to in life.
I will read that one eventually. It will happen.
Yeah, it's a good one.
All right, my next choice was Lost Boy by Christina Henry, and I read this for Owls, and I really, really enjoyed it. It's a Peter Pan retelling from the point of view of Hook, when he was Peter Pan's first lost boy, and it's very dark and raw and emotional, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, that one was really interesting, what you were telling me about it when you were reading that one.
Yeah.
All right. Next one I read was Everything Here is Beautiful by Mira T. Lee. This one was a very heavy story about two sisters that were Chinese. One of them was a Chinese immigrant, came over with her mother as a child, and her mother was pregnant with her younger sister when they came over to the United States. But it's a story about the younger, mostly revolving around the younger sister and her struggle with mental illness, which is some form of bipolar or a dissociative identity disorder, or a combination of it too. It's never really quite figured out or nailed down in the book, but just the relationships people have and how mental illness plays into that, how the, you know, mental illness affects the people around the person being affected by it, but then how that kind of reflects back on how that affects the person with, you know, suffering with the illness as well, and how they perceive that they're treated by the rest of the world because, you know, they're affected with this. And just very, very heavy, but very human story, which I think, you know, tries to give you a little more empathy towards people that, you know, realize that they don't have control as much,
Sure.
you know, due to these things, but realize that they're still human too.
Yeah. I forgot that you went through that phase of reading a couple really intense books, or a handful, I guess, not a couple. Okay, the next one I have is a kid's book, The Prince and the Dressmaker by Jen Wang. And I thought this was adorable. The girls really liked it too. It's a story about a dressmaker who is hired to make dresses for the prince, and because sometimes he wants to wear prince clothes and sometimes he wants to wear princess clothes, and I thought it was absolutely adorable. Highly recommend.
Yeah, it's a good story to read to the kids.
Yeah.
All right. The next thing I read was a nonfiction. It's Not That Bad, edited by Roxane Gay. This was a series of essays of people affected by rape culture and just their stories of anything from harassment to being a survivor of of sexual assault and violence. And it was I'm very glad I read it as a male. That has not been a victim of sexual violence. It was very eye-opening to really be put in the shoes of just these people and what they went through and how it changes them for the rest of their life. I'm glad that I read it because just thinking about rape culture, then actually getting some first-person perspective on it was very eye-opening to me.
Yeah. Oh, that was intense.
Mm-hmm.
The next one, number 5, is actually a whole series that I read book 2, 3, 3.5, and 4, or something like that this year. And that was Tales of Verania, or Tales from Verania, by T.J. Klune. And I really liked this series. The first one was The Lightning Struck Heart, and
That's right.
it was hilarious. And I don't even know how to describe it. It's so not everyone's cup of tea, but if it is for you, it's hilarious. If it's your sense of humor, it's absolutely hilarious. A fantasy with very sassy characters, and I just loved it so much.
Yeah, I could see that definitely not being something people's cup of tea for multiple reasons, not just for bigoted reasons, but for like misrepresentation or like.
Oh yeah.
All right. The next one on my list was Freshwater by Akwaki Emezi. I probably messed that up. But this was her debut author. She's a Nigerian, or a woman of Nigeria. And this was a story about a woman that perceives that she is inhabited by these river gods or multiple river gods, or she might have dissociative identity disorder. It's never decided, and it's kind of left for the reader to decide. But the thing she goes through in life is just essentially her going through young adulthood and into adulthood, with just these different personalities that tell her what to that take over her and that she lives her life through. Very, very hard at times to read, but then also, I don't know, it was just a fascinating story too that you just couldn't really put down while you're reading it. So definitely going to look up her name from time to time and see if she's got something new out.
Yeah. Yeah, I think she won an award or something.
It would not surprise me at all if that book won an award.
Okay, the next one for me is This Is Where I Leave You by Jonathan Tropper. I keep wanting to say Trapper, but it's Tropper. Let's see. This book was towards the very beginning of the year. So it was a family drama novel. And I don't read a lot of those with the family dynamic, but I really enjoyed this one. Family with 3 or 4 grown kids, and their mother, and they're sitting Shiva for their father who just passed. And I really enjoyed it. It was funny at times and really heartfelt. I watched the movie right after I read the book, and so now they're like blending in my head. But I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
All right. The next one I had on my list was Bird Box by Josh Malerman. I probably don't need to explain this one too much because it's all over BookTube, or was maybe a couple of years ago. Or something. I really enjoyed it. It was a very enjoyable, suspenseful book. Just good tension and everything in there. Watched the Netflix adaptation too, which I thought was pretty good. They, I had to change some things for like time and everything. I will say that I thought that the main male character, Tom, I pictured him as a much more average Joe than the kind of studly guy that he was in the movie. But still,
I think that happens a lot.
Yeah. Right.
Okay, in third place for best reads of the year was Hyde by Matthew Griffin. And this is just a kind of a slow-paced story about a couple and their, I don't even remember how many years it was, like 50 years together or something like that. And you get flashbacks, but mostly it's told when they're old, and one of them is in and out of the hospital and his health is really failing, and the other one is dealing with the fact that in this time period, it was like right after, between the wars, or like right after World War II, I don't remember, but being gay was like against the law basically, and you could have your entire life ruined if it came out. So they had to hide their relationship, and they were never seen in the same place at the same time. They didn't have any pictures or mementos from their 50 years together, and how heartbreaking that was, that nobody in their family knew that they had spent their entire life, loving someone. And yeah, it was really, I don't think it was the best written book that I read this year, but I certainly keep going back and like thinking about the themes and the the things in the book. So definitely enjoyed that.
Yeah. All right. The next one on my list was Kindred by Octavia Butler. Finally got around to reading some Octavia Butler. And this was a story about a woman who is getting displaced in time between the 1970s-ish and then the slave era of the United States, and mostly around a white ancestor who was a slave owner of her descendants. And just following her going back and, knowing him as a boy and thinking of him as, not so bad for, thinking that he has some empathy for the slaves and everything. But then as she goes back and forth, he grows up and, he just eventually just becomes a man of the times, of that period. Very, very compelling to just be in the place of someone who has always known freedom their whole life, or as much freedom as a black person in the United States knows. I'm sure that's arguable to this day. Especially we actually just the other day went to the Civil Rights Museum here in Jackson, Mississippi. But yeah, and then being thrown into into bondage, literally.
Okay, so second place for me is Waiting for Eden by Elliot Ackerman. This is the first book I read of the year, and spoiler, it's going to be the last book I read in the year. I'm going to read it again, this time on audio. This book was intense. It is a short and intense book. There is a soldier that has been... He's on life support, and he's alive, but he's so damaged from an explosion that happened that the doctors are basically telling his wife, like, you know, we could unplug him and put him out of his misery. It's been years. He's not ever going to get better. And his wife just can't let go. And so you're seeing the story of, from his perspective, trapped in this body that, you know, is just absolutely broken. And then you see some from her point of view, and then you also see some of it from a ghost. The main character's buddy, who was in the army with him, who died in the same explosion. And you see all three of them, and it was intense, but really, really, really good.
Yeah. Heavy.
Very heavy.
All right. Next one on my list, I'll say, is The Fall of Hyperion by Dan Simmons. This is the second in the Hyperion series. I thought it was just a duology, but apparently it's a quartet now at this point. I don't know if I want to dive into it quite yet, because it seemed to wrap up real well. This was a grand space opera of a story. That the first book is all pretty much a big setup where it's going around to each of the characters and they're telling their own sort of backstory, and then Fall of Hyperion is where essentially all the events happen of, you know, these people returning to this planet that's you know, got this weird creature on it that just kind of randomly kills people and puts them on it's called the Tree of Pain, which is like this big metal, you know, thing where they, you know, just, you know, where they're just impaled and, you know, not really dead, not alive. And then there's these time tombs that seem to move backwards in time. And but it's just crazy, the web that Dan Simmons wrote and just was able to so neatly tie up, and it just was so satisfying a completion in the end of it. It was really cool. Yeah.
Nice. Okay, I have 2 tied for first place.
Okay, I can do my last 2 together too. So
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay, so tied for first place, and I'm not sure which one goes first, but Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. I loved this book. This was about a woman who never seems to fit in ever with any group of friends, or she can't hold down a job. She feels so out of place until she gets hired working in a convenience store. And there are so many rules and guidelines that she finds it incredibly comforting, that there's a routine and she knows exactly what to do, when to do it, and she becomes really, really competent, really good at her job. But as she stays there year after year, she starts to get looked down upon by her family and acquaintances and people from school, and people don't understand why she's not married, why she's not having kids, why she still works at a convenience store. But she's completely content to be there. I don't know. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah. Not being defined by the job that you were.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Or actually, kind of the opposite. Completely defined, because she doesn't really have much of a personality on her own.
Oh,
she
okay.
tends to absorb the personality of people around her.
Oh, all
so, yeah. But, yeah.
Cool.
Should I do the other one, or do you want to...
I can wrap it up here. So, 9th on my list, in no particular order again. is The Wedding Date by Jasmine Gilroy. This was a super cute story about two people that, have, get stuck on an elevator together for 15 minutes while, there's whatever mechanical hiccup or whatever. And one of them has to go to a wedding but doesn't have a date. Ends up that they end up going to this wedding together, and then, of course, it's from there on out them falling in love, throughout the book. Super cute characters, super cute love story. And then the next one was the third book in this series, which is called The Wedding Party, which was about two of the friends of one of the characters in The Wedding Date. This was definitely the sequel that was deserved, that the Wedding Date deserved. I'll talk about the second book in another video.
Oh, perfect. Okay, and the other book that was tied for first place in my list was The History of Living Forever by Jake Wolfe. I won this book on a Goodreads giveaway, and I loved this book so much. It was a story about a man who struggled with mental health. He had clinical depression his entire life since he was a little kid, and he gets wrapped up in this idea of creating the elixir of life, and he thinks that if he can perfect this elixir, he can heal himself and finally feel better. But he ends up slowly poisoning himself, basically. Like, he's ingesting some really messed up stuff. And he makes horrible decisions in his life, and he just, like, you find out in chapter 1 he dies, and then the people around him have to figure out, like, deconstruct what happened, who he was, all these secrets that he had, and I really, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, sounds interesting.
Yeah.
Nice. All right, so that was our
best and worst.
Go ahead and comment below. Give us some of the best and worst that you read in 2019.
We'll be having a part 2 kind of video talking about our most disappointing
and then most enjoyable reads. Not particularly the best thing we read, but stuff we had a really good time reading.
Yes.
All right.
We'll see you next time, guys.
See you next time.